Recovered documents from Site-08 archives indicate that the anomaly known as SCP-8348 was first categorized not through direct Foundation detection, but by accident, surfacing from the private lives of Andrew and Hollis Durant. The couple, ordinary bookstore owners, became the subject of continuous monitoring after a pattern of anomalous displacement was reported through obscure online forums. Initial intercepts suggested nothing more than delusional correspondence, until handwriting verification and surveillance confirmed the impossible. The Durants were alternating between universes at dawn, living a single shared life, split across two realities. The anomaly's origin was traced to SCP-83481, a ritual candle acquired through an occult estate sale connected to the Order of the Sidereal Stag, a group with prior mentions in thaumaturgical blacklists. Instructions accompanying the candle had promised a ritual of proof, a test of love between two participants. Foundation linguists and historians later determined that the wording bore the hallmarks of binding contracts concealed in romanticized phrasing. The Durants, in their ignorance, lit the candle on New Year's Eve 2000. At the first sunrise of the millennium, their lives diverged into dual existences, each awakening on alternate days in Universe A or Universe B, as the couple themselves began to designate them. Containment was complicated by the fact that both Durants were not hostile, nor outwardly anomalous. They lived quietly, tending to their bookshop, leaving letters for one another across universes. Surveillance teams noted that these letters, recovered regularly from the bedside tables, displayed a startling level of continuity. Words written in one universe, reliably manifested in the other. Recipes, inventories, even affectionate notes appeared as tangible proof of their contact. The Foundation seized on this as the earliest stable channel of communication with both simultaneously. Director Nathan Reed approved provisional containment, though in practice it amounted to passive oversight. The anomaly could not be confined to a single site. It existed in transition, woven between two worlds. Instead, Class C amnestics were prepared for public exposure incidents, and research into neutralization was authorized. Dr. Bruce Caldwell of the Department of Applied Thaumatology spearheaded initial investigation. His reports emphasized the psychological strain of the anomaly as much as its mechanical properties. Andrew clung to esoteric explanations, cataloging tarot spreads and cross-referencing grimoires. Hollis, pragmatic and skeptical, sought rational models, quantum anomalies, neurological hallucinations, or even stress-induced psychosis. Yet each morning, the anomaly reasserted itself, undeniable and immutable. The Foundation maintained formal distance. The Durants were instructed to continue their daily lives, but all occult artifacts in their possession were confiscated, and the remains of SCP-83481 placed under experimental lock. What emerges most disturbingly from the earliest files is not the technical description of the phenomenon, but the deepening emotional fissures it carved. Their letters shifted from reassurance and domestic humor to bitter arguments over finances, trust, and control. SCP-8348 was not only splitting their realities, it was fracturing their marriage, piece by piece, under the Foundation's watchful eye. By the end of January 2000, the first experimental attempt to collapse the bifurcation was authorized. Caldwell's team prepared a Type 8 backlash compensation circle inside the Durant residence. The ritual remains of the candle were suspended between silver mirrors, while an Everhart resonator supplied the necessary Eve saturation. At dawn, as Andrew and Hollis stood on opposite ends of their living room in different universes, the Foundation attempted synchronization. For one moment, surveillance confirmed the impossible. Both manifested in the same space, visible to each other, though trembling and incomplete. Then the sunrise completed its cycle, and Andrew was pulled away again. What followed was documented not in technical logs, but in a handwritten letter from Hollis, tears staining the ink. "I could see you. I promise I'll make this right. The Foundation noted high levels of emotional distress, and the file closes its summary with bureaucratic finality. Experiment unsuccessful, anomaly persists. Yet in that failed convergence lies the seed of the story's escalation. Witnesses reported that Hollis, for one fleeting instant, touched Andrew's sleeve before he vanished. Fibers from his clothing bore trace thermic residue, later cataloged as proof that SCP-8348 could, under the right conditions, collapse. The candle was not a simple curse, it was a conditional trial. The Durants had triggered something far more intricate, a binding design to test the endurance of their bond across universes, with rules the Foundation could not yet decipher. The letters that followed the failed neutralization attempt carried the weight of despair disguised as perseverance. Hollis's handwriting, once steady and pragmatic, became erratic, the ink blotting where tears fell onto the page. He apologized profusely, admitting he had not stopped crying since the failed ritual. His words conveyed the desperation of a man who had, for a moment, touched his partner's presence only to feel it ripped away again by unseen laws of reality. Andy responded with forced optimism, insisting that this was only the Foundation's first attempt and that the researchers would surely succeed. He buried his anguish under small comforts, mentions of their book club's success, of muffins baked and incense purchased, trivial details masking a life unraveling. The surveillance files from this period are a study in contrast. Camera feeds from Universe A and Universe B display identical rooms populated by absence, only one bed ever occupied at a time. Audio recorders captured the muffled sobs of Hollis one night, the nervous laughter of Andy another. Foundation observers were instructed not to intervene, though one junior researcher noted in the margins of his report that he felt like a voyeur, watching two men struggle against cosmic cruelty while the Foundation reduced their pain to data points. The strain of financial disagreements soon eclipsed their shared determination to fix their condition. Andy's fascination with the occult section of the bookstore led him to order $1,000 worth of incense, depleting their remaining funds. Hollis's anger is preserved in the record, his letter blunt and unyielding. The shop could not survive if Andy's decisions continued unchecked. Andy retaliated in kind, accusing Hollis of treating him like an employee instead of a partner. The Foundation had not anticipated this side effect. The anomaly not only split their bodies but magnified every fault line in their relationship, forcing them to confront it in isolation. On February 1st, Hollis unilaterally canceled Andy's access to the business accounts, cutting him out of financial control entirely. His letter carried the chilling finality of a man at his breaking point. I'm disappointed. The next day, Andy's reply was venomous, accusing Hollis of arrogance, of never listening, of steamrolling over his opinions. The fight escalated until their words bled into contempt. Hollis reminded Andy that the bookstore was supposed to be their shared dream, not a one-sided burden. Andy spat back that it had always been Hollis's dream alone. These exchanges, archived meticulously by Foundation transcriptionists, reveal the gradual erosion of intimacy under the weight of anomaly and resentment. The Department of Applied Thaumatology documented this deterioration clinically, noting the potential for emotional volatility to interfere with future experiments. But to read the raw letters is to witness a relationship buckling under the strain of two universes conspiring to keep them apart. On February 5th, the silence began. Andy stopped replying to Hollis altogether, retreating into a void of wordless resistance. Hollis's letters grew frantic, alternating between anger and pleading. You're going to put me through the silent treatment from a whole other universe? Is this really how you want to do this? Later. Please talk to me again. By February 13th, his tone shifted entirely. He wrote a full apology, admitting he had let fear twist him into cruelty, confessing he had failed as a husband when Andy needed him most. His words no longer carried command, only remorse. I wish I'd listened to you when I still had the chance. The Foundation's analysts mark this as a turning point. Though their lives were fractured, the letters reveal a gradual softening, an attempt to rebuild trust. Andy, on Valentine's Day, broke his silence. His letter was long, intimate, and painfully self-aware. He admitted he had taken Hollis for granted, leaned too heavily on him, allowed carelessness to creep in, because he always assumed Hollis would catch him when he fell. He confessed to returning the incense shipment, restocking the romance shelves, repairing what he could of the damage. He ended with words that Foundation archivists underlined as possibly significant to the ritual itself. "There's no universe where I wouldn't forgive you. Even if we're stuck like this forever, I am committed to you, to us." That night, Foundation monitors recorded something they had never seen before. At dawn, when the usual transfer was expected, sensors detected a spike in EVE intensity, double the typical measure. Cameras in Universe A captured the simultaneous presence of both Andrew and Hollis. For the first time since the anomaly began, they awoke together in the same bed. The anomaly had shifted, and with it, the Foundation's understanding. What had been seen as a thaumaturgic curse now revealed itself as something conditional, responsive not to technical countermeasures, but to the state of their bond. The candle's promise, love to be proven, echoed through every file, every attempt at explanation. It was no longer simply an experiment in containment. It was a test neither science nor thaumaturgy alone could resolve. The Foundation, for all its machinery and procedures, had overlooked the simplest factor. The condition for neutralization was not in mirrors or resonators, but in the letters, the apologies, and the fragile persistence of two men refusing to let go, even across the rift of universes. Their love, cracked and battered, had finally aligned, and in that alignment, reality itself relented. The morning of February 15th was marked in the logs with nothing more than a sterile line. EVE intensity spike measured at 10.5 kilocaspers, anomalous transfer event disrupted. What the official files failed to capture was the profound human dimension that unfolded inside the Durant residence. Surveillance footage shows a burst of blue-white radiance flooding the bedroom, a phenomenon that lasted less than 5 seconds but rendered both monitoring teams speechless. When visibility returned, both Andrew and Hollis were present in Universe A, clutching each other in disbelief. Their embrace, silent but trembling, was later transcribed with detached language in the experiment report. Subjects displayed high levels of emotional agitation, interpreted as relief. The Foundation had no protocol for anomalies resolved not through its intervention, but through the agency of the affected. Dr. Caldwell's after-action notes reveal his discomfort. He hypothesized that the ritual's requirement had not been technical, but emotional, a completion of the bond that had been fractured by resentment. His language, though clinical, betrays unease at the implications. The Foundation cannot replicate or enforce emotional states. SCP-8348 neutralized itself according to internal logic. This admission undermined the core ethos of the department: control, predict, neutralize. Instead, what prevailed was something immeasurable. Site Director Reed was swift to order the anomaly downgraded. SCP-8348 was stamped neutralized, and the Durants signed mimetically enforced non-disclosure agreements, binding them to silence under penalty of psychological compulsion. The object itself, the remnants of the candle, was archived in a cold vault, stripped of significance now that its anomalous effect had ceased. The case file was closed, shuffled into the growing backlog of anomalies rendered inert. But the dossier does not end there. Buried in supplemental files are fragments the Foundation did not intend for wide circulation. Personal notes, discarded correspondence, and testimonies that slipped through redaction. A junior field researcher recorded in his logbook that he had never witnessed containment hinge on something so fragile. "We tried to force a solution with machines and rituals," he wrote, "but in the end, it was simply two people finding their way back to each other." His entry was flagged, redacted, and filed under unprofessional commentary. Even the Durant's final letters, exchanged in the days leading up to the resolution, reveal a gradual merging of perspectives. Hollis confessed to letting fear corrode his trust. Andy admitted to careless reliance. The convergence of their voices in mutual apology and renewed devotion coincided exactly with the end of the anomaly. To the Foundation's researchers, this was frustratingly unquantifiable, a variable they could neither reproduce nor assign numerical weight. But in the private narrative of the Durants, it was the answer all along. Still, there is a shadow that lingers in the margins of the file. Analysis of the thaumic residue left in the room where they awoke together suggests that the anomaly was not eradicated but concluded, as if a contract had been fulfilled. The wording on the ritual instructions, "Love to be proven," has never been conclusively deciphered. What condition was satisfied? Did the candle's power simply vanish, or was it collected, its energy absorbed elsewhere? The Order of the Sidereal Stag remains only a half-documented occult society, their intentions obscured. Foundation agents investigating the estate sale that provided the candle uncovered further artifacts, each labeled with cryptic phrases suggesting trials, tests, or packs. Some have since been placed into secure storage. Others remain unaccounted for. The question that haunts the archivists is whether SCP-8348 was a unique event tied only to the Durants, or if it represents a broader mechanism. Could other rituals from the same order be circulating unnoticed, awaiting activation by unsuspecting hands? The Durants themselves, now classified as baseline civilians, live under strict observation despite their anomaly's neutralization. Publicly, they are no different from any other couple. Privately, their lives remain shadowed by Foundation surveillance teams, wary of recurrence. The documentary voice of the Foundation file concludes with an antiseptic paragraph. SCP-8348 classified neutralized as of 02-15-2000. No further containment procedures required. But behind those words lies a more unsettling truth. The Foundation encountered an anomaly it could not master, one that resolved itself through an intangible condition beyond its grasp. The Durant case remains a reminder that not all anomalies can be dismantled with instruments or arcane diagrams. Some are woven into the human heart, and in that domain, the Foundation holds no authority. And yet, the file does not sleep. Researchers reviewing old cases whisper about the pattern. Every so often, another item from the Sidereal Stag archive resurfaces, carrying promises framed in riddles. And when it does, the question returns, unspoken but heavy in the air. If love can prove itself across universes, what other trials might be demanded by forces older than the Foundation itself? The archived interviews conducted in the aftermath of SCP-8348's resolution read less like debriefings and more like fragments of confession. Andrew Durant, when questioned by Dr. Caldwell, described waking up beside Hollis with such overwhelming clarity that his voice broke during the transcript. "I didn't think it was real," he whispered before catching himself, apologizing and retreating behind nervous laughter. Hollis's testimony was more restrained, but surveillance notes record how he clutched Andrew's hand under the table throughout the session, as though fearing the anomaly might reactivate at the slightest separation. Despite their reunion, the Foundation's interest did not fade. Internal memoranda revealed divisions within Site-08 staff. Caldwell pressed to continue studies into the thaumaturgic mechanics of the ritual, arguing that the Order of the Sidereal Stag had engineered a deliberately self-correcting anomaly. He proposed that what had occurred to the Durants could be replicated or weaponized. His correspondence with Director Reed shows a growing rift. Reed considered the matter concluded, unwilling to risk destabilizing the anomaly again. Caldwell, however, believed the Foundation had glimpsed a mechanism for altering reality itself through emotional catalysts. His words were clinical, but the implication was unmistakable. If human relationships could be harnessed as conduits, They could serve as tools in controlling anomalies far beyond candles and occult trinkets. The dissent was quietly buried. Caldwell's proposals were redacted under the justification of unfounded speculation, but fragments of his drafts survived in deleted file recoveries. In one, he wrote, "We must ask not only how love neutralized SCP-8348, but whether the ritual demanded its proof as fuel. What if affection was consumed, spent as currency to restore balance? If so, the cost is hidden. The Foundation cannot afford to ignore the possibility that something was taken." These notes were suppressed, marked with disciplinary warnings. Yet their existence suggests an unease that permeated the department long after the case was declared closed. The Durants themselves returned to their routines, though the Foundation's shadow never left them. Their bookstore, once a quaint community hub, became a site of layered observation. Customers browsing shelves were unknowingly monitored, receipts copied, phone calls transcribed. The couple, though outwardly reconciled, bore subtle scars. Psychological evaluations noted recurring dreams in which one or the other awoke to find themselves once again alone, the morning light stealing their partner away. Hollis reported compulsively checking the bed at dawn for months afterward, his panic only subsiding when he physically felt Andrew beside him. What troubles investigators most are the lingering anomalous traces. Thalamic analysis of the Durant residence months later detected faint residual signatures consistent with trans-universal transfer events, though at levels so low they could be dismissed as background noise. Caldwell insisted these traces proved the anomaly was dormant rather than neutralized, likening it to embers beneath ash. Reed, in turn, ordered all further tests halted, warning that unnecessary probing might reignite whatever contract had been fulfilled. The Order of the Sidereal Stag loomed larger in the follow-up investigations. Cross-referenced estate sales and antique inventories suggested at least 6 other artifacts linked to the same group had entered private collections. Each carried inscriptions promising trials, faith to be forged, trust to be tested, truth to be revealed. Though none have yet manifested anomalies, the Foundation has classified them as potential SCP objects in waiting. Quiet acquisition teams have been dispatched to retrieve them, often under the guise of ordinary auctions or museum transfers. The implication is clear. SCP-8348 may not have been an isolated accident, but one chapter in a broader catalog of occult devices designed to measure, distort, and exploit the human condition. There are notes in the file, half-finished, uncirculated drafts, suggesting some researchers questioned whether the Durants' reconciliation was their own achievement or merely the final condition demanded by the artifact. If their reunion was orchestrated by an external design, then their love was less a triumph than a manipulated outcome, a puppet's dance to an unseen ritual. One marginal annotation scrawled in ink across a draft summary reads simply, "Whose proof was this, really?" The handwriting has never been matched to any staff member. The official narrative of closure therefore feels incomplete. Yes, the Durants survived. Yes, they were reunited. Yes, the Foundation stamped the file as neutralized and moved on. But buried within the unredacted layers is an enduring sense of unease, that what ended on a February morning in 2000 was not a solved anomaly, but a finished trial, its conditions met, its purpose fulfilled. The Order of the Sidereal Stag had demanded proof, and proof had been delivered. What remains unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable, is to whom that proof was shown, and what it purchased. The Foundation's post-resolution surveillance of the Durants produced reports that, at first glance, resembled routine civilian monitoring. Yet, as the weeks passed, the tone of the documentation shifted from detached observation to something bordering on apprehension. Agents noted how the couple seemed inseparable, their daily routines stitched tightly together as though fearful that distance itself might undo them. Every morning, Andrew was observed watching Hollis wake, whispering reassurances that he was still there. Hollis, in turn, lingered on the threshold of their bedroom each night, staring into the dark as though expecting it to swallow one of them whole. Psychological evaluations filed in March 2000 document an unusual phenomenon. Both reported feeling an intangible presence during moments of intimacy, as if their reconciliation had been overseen. Andrew described it as being watched by the candle, even though it's gone. Hollis was more guarded, but eventually admitted to dreams in which antlered silhouettes observed him in silence. These confessions were dismissed in the official summary as post-anomalous stress responses. Still, the language of the raw transcripts reveals genuine unease. Fear not of the anomaly returning, but of its architects still watching. Dr. Caldwell, unable to let go of his suspicions, began compiling a parallel file outside the official archive. His recovered notes describe cross-analysis of the candle wax residue, in which he detected faint thermic signatures resembling binding marks rather than destructive ones. He proposed that the Order of the Sidereal Stag had not simply cursed the Durants but tested them, and that the successful conclusion of SCP-8348 represented not a neutralization, but a completed transaction. "We are cataloging this as if it were a machine," he wrote. "It is not. It is a ledger. The payment has been made, and we do not know to whom." These words gained little traction with site leadership. Reed ordered Caldwell's independent project dissolved, citing risk of contaminating the Durant's recovery with unnecessary paranoia. Yet fragments of Caldwell's arguments were preserved in later reports by junior staff. One researcher recorded that during thaumaturgic scans of the Durant household, she detected a faint harmonic echo, a resonance not unlike what occurs after a ritual summons. The echo faded quickly, but she logged her concern that something was listening and then withdrew. Her entry was marked inconclusive, her equipment recalibrated, her observation erased from final publication. Meanwhile, the Durants themselves began to normalize. Their bookshop, once teetering under disputes, stabilized as they worked in tandem. Customers returned. Letters, once left between worlds, now became notes tucked into lunchboxes or scrawled on receipts, artifacts of ordinary love rather than supernatural survival. Yet even these small gestures found their way into Foundation files, photographed, transcribed, and cataloged. The justification was the need to monitor for anomalous recurrence, but the effect was voyeuristic. The Foundation became custodian of their most intimate moments, archiving the very proof the ritual had demanded. By late spring, surveillance agents noted something stranger still. Both Andrew and Hollis displayed heightened sensitivity to mirrors. They avoided them at dawn and dusk, claiming reflections felt a half step too slow. On one occasion, an agent recorded Andrew pausing before a mirror in the bookstore's back office, staring until his reflection seemed to waver, then stepping back with visible fear. Hollis later covered the mirror with a sheet, dismissing it as cracked glass, though inspection confirmed no physical defect. These incidents were filed under residual paranoia, but cross-referenced annotations from the thaumatology department suggest concern that the exchange mechanism of SCP-8348 had left an imprint, a permanent thinning between universes. The Foundation's bureaucracy did what it always does. It closed ranks. Official reports grew shorter, cleaner, less willing to acknowledge anomalies that strayed from containment narratives. The designation remained neutralized, and any data suggesting otherwise was relegated to side files. Yet the unease persisted among those who had witnessed the case firsthand. In whispered conversations between junior researchers, the Durant's ordeal became a cautionary tale, not of anomalous danger, but of the Foundation's blind spot. For all its power, the organization had been powerless to resolve SCP-8348. Only the couple's fractured, imperfect reconciliation had satisfied the ritual's condition. The question lingered in every shadowed annotation. What if their bond had failed? Would the anomaly have consumed them entirely, splitting them into silence across two empty universes? Would the candle have demanded another trial, another pair, another proof? No one could answer. The sidereal stag's motives remained opaque, their surviving artifacts dormant, but waiting. The Durant file, stamped shut, was meant to be an end, yet for those who read beyond the official summaries, it remained a beginning. A suggestion that love, grief, and human frailty were not merely incidental to the anomalous world, but currencies traded in rituals older than memory, and somewhere, perhaps far beyond the Foundation's reach, the account books of the sidereal stag were still open. By the time the Foundation formally downgraded SCP-8348 to neutralized, the case file had already begun to take on the texture of folklore inside Site-08. Staff who had reviewed the Durant letters spoke of them in hushed tones, as though the intimacy contained in the handwriting carried a lingering anomaly of its own. Surveillance officers trained to detach found themselves reading the exchanges late into the night, long after their shifts had ended, searching for something they couldn't quite name. It was as if the Foundation itself had become ensnared by the story, not of an object, but of two men refusing to collapse under the weight of universes. Still, bureaucracy demanded the file continue to grow. Regular health checks were scheduled, psychological assessments filed, and economic audits of the bookstore appended to the archive. Hollis's ledgers were copied and annotated, Andrew's promotional flyers scanned and tagged. The Foundation insisted this was precautionary, a guard against resurgence of the anomaly, but the meticulous preservation had another effect. It transformed the couple's life into a museum of proof. Every receipt, every handwritten note, every marginal doodle became an artifact, a relic of a trial already concluded. What unsettled the analysts were the lingering inconsistencies. During one unannounced inspection, a field agent swore he glimpsed Andrew vanish for less than a second when he crossed from the living room into the kitchen, a ripple in the air snapping closed behind him. Logs marked it as hallucinatory stress response, but internal debate followed. If the ritual had been satisfied, why were such anomalies still surfacing, however faintly? One memo, unsigned, speculated that the ritual might have tethered the Durants permanently to a liminal state, binding them not to two separate universes, but to a single reality stretched thin around them. Dr. Caldwell pressed this point repeatedly. He argued that the anomaly's conclusion was not an erasure, but a consolidation, that the candle had not ended the split, but rather forced both universes to overlap through the anchor of the Durants' reconciliation. In his recovered notes, he wrote, "We are not observing a neutralization. We are standing inside the merged seam of two worlds. The Durants are not only survivors, they are the stitch." These remarks never reached the official summary. Director Reed ensured they were excised, citing lack of supporting data. Meanwhile, the Durants adjusted uneasily to their new normal. Interviews reveal that they often awoke convinced they were still apart, requiring physical confirmation before they could relax. Andrew described touching Hollis's hair at dawn, running his fingers through it to reassure himself it would not vanish. Hollis admitted to sleeping with his arm draped across Andrew's chest, not from affection alone, but as a ward against absence. Their intimacy had become both survival mechanism and ritual act, a daily renewal of the proof the candle had once demanded. Foundation monitoring grew quieter, but never ceased. Months later, thermic sensors hidden in the shop's storage room detected a faint harmonic pulse, coinciding with the couple's anniversary. The reading was subtle, almost dismissible, but its frequency matched the cadence of the original transfer spikes. Analysts filed it away with the usual stamp, residual background. Yet some whispered it was evidence that the ritual had not ended, but marked anniversaries like a calendar, commemorating its own success. The Order of the Sidereal Stag lingered on the margins of these discussions. Recovered documents hinted at other artifacts, each tied to trials of human endurance, faith, loyalty, sacrifice. If SCP-8348 represented love to be proven, what other proofs were being demanded elsewhere, unseen? The Foundation's archivists could only speculate. The Durants had passed their trial, but perhaps others had failed theirs, vanishing without ever drawing the Foundation's gaze. Thus, the file sat heavy in the archives, its cover stamped neutralized, but its contents anything but settled. The Durants lived on, their bookstore a quiet point of surveillance, their love both shield and wound. And for those who dared to read too closely, the story was less about the closing of an anomaly and more about an unanswered question. When the sidereal stag demanded proof, who was watching, and what did it do with what it learned? The months following the official neutralization marked a strange chapter in the Durant case file. On paper, they were no longer anomalous. Their lives were to be monitored only as a formality, a safeguard against recurrence. But the reality captured by embedded agents painted a far more unsettled picture. Every dawn became a ritual in itself, Hollis waking first, pressing his palm against Andrew's shoulder, waiting for the warmth of flesh to prove that he was still there. Every night Andrew would leave small, almost childish assurances. A muffin on the counter, a note on the fridge, a doodle of interlocked hands scrawled on a receipt. These gestures seemed trivial, but Foundation psychologists noted them as compulsive anchors, unconscious attempts to bind themselves against the possibility of separation. One report records Andrew standing in their bookstore, paralyzed before a display mirror meant for customers. He whispered to it, as though to another version of himself, "Still here, right?" Hollis, observing from the register, crossed the room to take his hand and lead him away, neither man acknowledging what had just transpired. Later, thermic scans confirmed faint echoes in that same mirror, a trace vibration in the glass, unlike any natural reflection. Though officially dismissed as environmental interference, Caldwell underlined the notation in red in his personal copy of the file, writing beside it, "Residual transfer channels, dormant, not gone." Meanwhile, the Order of the Sidereal Stag emerged more vividly in Foundation investigations. Several estate sales linked to the same network revealed objects labeled with equally cryptic promises: faith to be forged, sacrifice to be counted, truth to be shown. Each artifact bore carvings resembling ledger marks, as though belonging to a catalog of bargains. None had activated under controlled testing, yet their silence was deemed more disturbing than proof of activity. The fear among a minority of researchers was simple. The Durants had not been chosen at random. Their candle was one of many waiting to be lit. This growing unease clashed with Director Reed's insistence on finality. In his memos, he chastised staff for anthropomorphizing the anomaly, warning that treating SCP-8348 as a sentient test would invite needless paranoia. To Reed, the matter was resolved. To others, especially those who had read the unfiltered letters, the opposite was true. The candle had not demanded their lives, but something had demanded their proof. That debt could not be dismissed with a classification stamp. Inside the Durant household, the aftermath carried a quieter dread. Hollis began keeping every note Andrew left him, filing them in a shoebox hidden under their bed. "Evidence," he explained once during a follow-up evaluation. When pressed, he admitted he feared waking one morning to find that the last months had been an illusion, that the candle's trick had only given them temporary reprieve. "If it happens again," he told the Foundation's interviewer, "I want to know we were real." His words were entered into the psychological log, but the comment was never discussed in analysis. The Foundation's surveillance audio also captured occasional conversations between the two that hinted at their ongoing suspicion of being observed. Andrew once murmured, half asleep, "They're still watching, aren't they?" To which Hollis replied, "Always. That's how they know we passed." These remarks were redacted in the official transcript, deemed unhelpful to clinical evaluation. But the archivist who annotated the file left a single note in the margin. Passed for whom? By the close of the year 2000, The Durant case no longer appeared in active briefings. It was buried deeper into the archives, its designation sitting quietly among dozens of anomalies, reduced to academic curiosity. Yet the whispers among the staff persisted, carried not in reports, but in conversations after hours, when the sterile light of Site-08's hallways gave way to uneasy speculation. The consensus was never spoken aloud, but it hung in the air nonetheless. SCP-8348 had not ended. It had concluded, a trial completed, a debt marked off, an entry written in a ledger no one in the Foundation could read. And in the margins of those quiet speculations, one haunting question remained. If love had to be proven, what other proofs would the sidereal stag demand? And what would it take when the next candle burned? By the first anniversary of the anomaly's collapse, the Foundation's records on the Durants had grown quiet, but not empty. Agents embedded in Salt Lake City continued to submit monthly updates, most of them routine, noting sales figures from the bookstore, attendance at the small occult book club Andrew still insisted on running, and the couple's seemingly ordinary domestic life. Yet within those reports lingered moments that felt anything but ordinary. On January 1, 2001, both men were observed awake before dawn, sitting on the edge of their bed in silence, hands clasped tightly. When the sun rose without incident, Hollis wept openly, pressing his forehead against Andrew's shoulder. Andrew whispered, "We made it," over and over, as though daring the anomaly to return. Surveillance audio picked up muffled sobs, followed by laughter. Later, the file would contain only a sterile line. Subjects experienced emotional release on anniversary of activation. Despite the official designation of neutralized, fragments of anomaly persisted in unexpected ways. A delivery driver reported seeing two men in the bookstore one morning, both resembling Andrew Durant, shelving books in silence before one simply turned a corner and failed to reappear. The incident was dismissed as mistaken identity, but the driver's statement found its way into a supplemental file. That same month, Andrew confided to a Foundation-appointed therapist that he occasionally felt stretched thin, like part of me is elsewhere waiting to be pulled back. These words, too, were marked as residual trauma, though thalamic residue was again detected in the residence during routine sweeps. Dr. Caldwell, increasingly marginalized within the department, continued to insist that the case was not closed. In his private notes, he theorized that the Durants had not neutralized an anomaly, but fulfilled a condition written into reality itself. He compared the candle to a seal, a device designed to test whether human bonds could hold across the fracture of universes. "The ledger is balanced," he wrote, "but the account remains open." His warnings, ignored by leadership, circulated quietly among younger staff who had grown disillusioned with the neat fictions of the neutralized classification. Within the Durant household, the signs of lingering strain grew subtle but undeniable. Hollis, once skeptical of Andrew's spiritual instincts, began lighting candles around the shop at night, muttering that it was better to keep watch. Andrew, who once dove eagerly into the occult, grew hesitant, shelving certain grimoires in boxes marked "not for sale." Their roles seemed inverted, Hollis embracing superstition, Andrew retreating into pragmatism. Foundation analysts noted the irony, but failed to grasp its deeper resonance. Both men were trying, in their own ways, to guard against a return of the sidereal stag's trial. Letters continued too, though not anomalous ones. Hollis left short notes in Andrew's pockets, and Andrew returned the gesture by slipping lines of poetry into Hollis's ledgers. These were intercepted and cataloged by surveillance teams, scanned and filed as non-anomalous correspondence. Yet when compared to the earlier exchanges across universes, their tone carried the same urgency. Each word a plea against absence, each note a reaffirmation that they were still, impossibly, together. The Foundation's stance remained rigid. Site Director Reed issued a memo warning staff not to romanticize the file, reiterating that anomalies must be understood through data, not sentiment. But behind the official facade, a different current of thought persisted. Some staff whispered that the sidereal stag had not only demanded proof from the Durants, but had received it, and once something receives proof, it also records. The unsettling implication was that somewhere, in some inaccessible archive beyond human reach, the Durants' ordeal was logged not as a tragedy or miracle, but as an entry in a ledger kept by powers the Foundation barely understood. Thus the case lingered as a paradox, closed but never at rest. A candle extinguished, yet its smoke still clung to every corner of the archive. For the Durants, every dawn was relief. For the Foundation, every dawn was a reminder that not all anomalies end. They only step back into the shadows, waiting for the next trial to begin. By mid-2001, the Durant file had settled into the kind of quiet that usually precedes archival burial. Surveillance reports became perfunctory, their language dry and standardized. Subjects in stable condition, no anomalous activity observed. Yet tucked between the lines of these official summaries, fragments emerged that suggested the story was not truly over. One such fragment came from an intercepted phone call between Hollis and a distant cousin. The cousin had asked casually about their New Year's, and Hollis replied with a laugh that trembled at the edges, "We spent it proving we still exist." The Foundation transcriber underlined the phrase in red, noting that the remark was too specific to be dismissed as coincidence. When agents interviewed Hollis later, he brushed it aside as a joke, but the unease remained. Andrew, for his part, began to develop a peculiar habit. Several reports note him pausing whenever he encountered antlers, mounted deer heads in shops, decorative motifs in cafes, even an illustration in a children's book. Each time, his demeanor shifted. He would stare too long, his hands tightening, before forcing himself to look away. Asked once by a therapist why he reacted that way, Andrew muttered, "It's them, watching." The transcript cuts off there, the remainder redacted, but in the margins a psychologist scribbled, "Residual association with Order of the Sidereal Stag." Meanwhile, Caldwell's private investigations continued in defiance of Reed's orders. Recovered drafts from his home terminal reveal an obsessive mapping of connections between artifacts linked to the sidereal stag. One particularly disturbing entry proposed that the artifacts were not isolated anomalies, but components of a larger system, a network of trials distributed across time and geography. "If love to be proven was only one test," he wrote, "then faith, truth, and sacrifice are others. We are not containing objects. We are stumbling into an exam we do not understand." His notes were confiscated during a disciplinary review, but not before copies circulated quietly among junior researchers. The Durants themselves tried to move forward. Their bookstore thrived modestly, bolstered by local book clubs and community events. Yet surveillance teams reported subtle signs of ongoing unease. Andrew sometimes left a candle burning in the shop window overnight, despite fire safety codes. Hollis repainted the back office 3 times in as many months, each time covering what he insisted were cracks in the plaster. Thermic scans revealed faint resonances exactly where the cracks had appeared, though the anomalies never lasted more than hours. The reports conclude with the familiar dismissal, "No evidence of renewed SCP-8348 activity." Still, in one classified addendum, a junior agent confided that he felt as though the Durants were living inside a wound the Foundation refuses to acknowledge. He described their lives as stitched together but fragile, their every gesture echoing the ritual that had nearly destroyed them. "It's like watching scar tissue try to remember what it means to be flesh," he wrote. His commentary was flagged as unprofessional, but not erased. It lingers in the archive, a quiet testament to the unease of those who had seen too much. The case, therefore, remained 2 things at once: publicly neutralized, privately unsettled. The official files ended with clinical closure, but the shadows of the sidereal stag stretched further, reminding every reader that rituals are not extinguished, they are fulfilled. And fulfillment is not the same as disappearance. What had judged the Durants may not have left. It may only have moved on, waiting for the next pair to light the wrong candle, speak the wrong words, and open themselves to a trial that demands proof no human should be asked to give. By the winter of 2002, the Durant file existed in two parallel states, much like the men themselves once had. Officially, the anomaly was dead, its classification sealed, its documentation tucked into shelves reserved for closed cases. But beneath the surface, the dossier kept accumulating scraps, whispered testimony, minor field notes, fragments of intercepted speech that no one dared submit to the main archive. These fragments spoke not of an anomaly ended, but of its shadow stretching on. One field agent reported an unsettling encounter while browsing the bookstore undercover. Hollis had been speaking casually to a customer when the conversation turned to relationships. The agent swore he heard Hollis say, "Sometimes it feels like someone's still grading us." When pressed, Hollis brushed it off with a chuckle, but the agent wrote in his log that it was the first time he had heard either of the Durants acknowledge their ordeal in public. That comment was never entered into the official record. Instead, it was filed into the personal effects folder, a growing collection of moments too anomalous to ignore, but too intangible to prove. Andrew's journals, copied discreetly during routine inspections, reveal a more intimate strain. His entries describe dreams of standing in infinite corridors, lined with mirrors, each reflecting a different version of himself. In some, Hollis was beside him. In others, he was alone. "Every door leads to a test I haven't taken yet," one entry reads. He confessed to waking from these dreams in panic, clutching Hollis until dawn. Psychologists logged the symptoms as lingering trauma, but thalamic resonance spikes were recorded on the same nights his dreams occurred. Caldwell, by then pushed to the margins of Site-08, had begun sharing his suspicions with contacts outside the Foundation hierarchy. A recovered draft of an email, intercepted before it was sent, speaks of the ledger still open, entries waiting to be filled. He hinted that the sidereal stag artifacts might be connected through some hidden design, each requiring a human ordeal to balance itself. The email was never transmitted, his workstation locked, and his access curtailed. Yet copies circulated through whispers, each retelling a little more distorted, until Caldwell himself became a kind of ghost story within the site. The researcher who tried to follow the stag's tracks and vanished into administrative silence. Meanwhile, the Durants themselves began showing signs of shifting under the pressure of normalcy. Their reconciled tenderness, once fragile but luminous, hardened into vigilance. Surveillance transcripts captured Andrew reminding Hollis at least twice a week, "Don't forget, they could come back." Hollis often replied, "Then we'll prove it again." Their love, once a refuge, had been reforged into a watchtower, constantly on alert. The Foundation's archivists noted the paradox. The anomaly was gone, yet it continued to dictate their lives. Agents tasked with long-term observation often described an uncanny sensation in their own logs. Several wrote of feeling as if they were not only watching the Durants, but being watched themselves, as though the act of surveillance fed into the same ritual the candle had once ignited. One particularly chilling note, written in the margins of a field report, asked, if love was to be proven, who required the witnesses? Us or them? The identity of the writer remains uncertain. His handwriting has not been matched to any official personnel. Thus, the Durant case grew into a silent heresy within the Foundation. On one hand, it stood as proof that anomalies could collapse not under force, but through human resilience. On the other, it whispered of a deeper game being played, with the Foundation itself unknowingly serving as participant and scribe. The Order of the Sidereal Stag remained absent, Yet its presence was felt in every unexplained flicker of glass, every echoing dream, every tremor of paranoia that rippled outward from two men who had lit the wrong candle. The case's conclusion in the official record remains absolute, neutralized, but the hidden fragments suggest a different ending, one written not in redacted reports but in the private margins. The anomaly had not ended. It had simply moved its gaze elsewhere, satisfied with one proof and waiting patiently for the next. The final entries in the Durant file carry a tone of exhaustion, as if the archivists themselves were weary of sifting through the residue of a story the Foundation no longer wished to acknowledge. By late 2002, the couple appeared outwardly as nothing more than ordinary civilians, two men running a modest bookshop, paying bills, attending community events. Yet every detail the Foundation collected, every receipt, every overheard word, every dream noted in therapy, suggested that the anomaly had not disappeared, but rather embedded itself permanently in their lives. One night in November, surveillance audio recorded Andrew murmuring in his sleep, "The candle isn't out, it's only waiting." Hollis woke him, soothing him back into slumber, but not before Andrew's voice was caught on tape again, whispering, "It'll ask again." The log marks this as somniloquy, but the file annotator underlined the phrase and added a question mark. No follow-up was conducted. By early 2003, Site-08 closed the Durant assignment entirely. Agents were withdrawn, sensors dismantled, and the case file sealed into the neutralized archives. Officially, no further activity was detected. Unofficially, however, whispers persisted. A junior analyst, reviewing thermic resonance reports years later, noted unexplained pulses aligning with the Durant's wedding anniversary. Another recalled rumors of Caldwell's last private remark before being reassigned. "The stag doesn't test once, it keeps the score." Both comments were scrubbed from circulation, yet copies remained, tucked away in personal notebooks, circulating like forbidden scripture. As for Andrew and Hollis, their lives slipped beneath the Foundation's gaze, but never entirely out of it. Intermittent checks decades later confirmed they remained together, their bond seemingly unshaken by what had been endured. Customers described them as inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, leaving affectionate notes in the margins of receipts. Yet there were other stories too, harder to explain. A child swearing she saw two Andys shelving books, a neighbor claiming to glimpse shadows shaped like antlers reflected in the shop's glass windows. None of these incidents were ever formally logged. The case file's closing addendum is clinical, almost perfunctory. SCP-8348 neutralized, no further containment procedures required. But appended to the final page, handwritten in ink no one has ever admitted to, lies a single line: "Love proven once may never need to be proven again, yet the trial is only ever past, not forgotten." With that, the Durant file ends. The Foundation buried it under 1,000 others, a story of a candle, a fracture between worlds, and two men who stitched themselves back together through something that could not be measured. But for those who still read the dossier in secret, there is no sense of closure. Instead, there is only the unease of having glimpsed the hand of something vast, something patient, something that treats human love not as sacred, but as currency in a ledger written by the Order of the Sidereal Stag. And though the Foundation marked the case neutralized, every dawn that passes carries the unspoken question: if one candle was enough to split two lives across universes, how many more are still waiting in the dark to be lit?